So I know there are going to be quite a few I told you so's out there. In fact, I could almost feel Corin watching this segment saying I told you so to me, because him and I have had this discussion previously. But the Washington Post is out with a new article based on a study. And what they say is money actually can buy happiness, study finds. So it's a new report, and it took place over a couple decades, actually, I believe. I think it was with the General Social Survey. And apparently more money is associated with being increasingly happier. So let me read you some from the Washington Post article here. They say, the expanding class divide in happiness in the United States, and it took place between 1972 and 2016, published last week in the journal Emotion, found that among people aged 30 and older, the correlation between income and happiness has steadily risen over the years. The study used data from the General Social Survey, one of the longest-running nationally representative surveys of U.S. adults, with 44,198 participants between 1972 and 2016. It found a growing class divide in happiness, with the happiness of whites with no college education steadily declining since 1972, while the happiness of whites with a college education stayed steady. For African Americans, the results were different, but still reflected a rising money-happiness correlation. Happiness levels of blacks with no college education has stayed steady since 1972, while the happiness of blacks with college education has increased. For both races, the happiness gap by education has grown. The findings challenge the money can't buy happiness adage, which had been supported by other studies, including a widely cited 2010 Princeton University report showing that at levels higher than $75,000, a rise in income is not associated with greater happiness. The General Social Survey did not ask exactly the same question as that used by the Princeton study, which asked participants how they had felt the previous day and whether they were living the best possible life for themselves. The General Social Survey asked, taken all together, how would you say things are these days? Would you say you are very happy, pretty happy, or not too happy? The new study divided respondents into quintiles and deciles on the basis of income and looked at how they answered that question over several decades. So in this study, they say, no, it is true, the more money that somebody made, generally speaking, the happier they were. There was a statistically significant change in happiness level the more money they made. Now, the thing that I always referenced when having this conversation was the exact study that they cited from 2010, the Princeton study, which found that, and it's interesting, the way they phrased it was, oh, money doesn't buy happiness, but that's not what the Princeton study actually says. The Princeton study says that as you go from very low income and you steadily rise up to $75,000 a year, there is a measurable, statistically significant increase in happiness the more you go up the income scale. But, and here's the point, once you hit $75,000, it kind of tops out and stays the same. So somebody who makes $75,000 a year versus somebody who makes $250,000 a year versus somebody who makes $2.5 million a year, everything $75,000 and above, your happiness level doesn't go up. It stays the same. But you are more likely to be happy if you make $75,000 or more than if you make $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 a year. So the Princeton study did not really say money doesn't buy happiness. In fact, I would say a more accurate description of that study is money buys happiness up to a certain point, and then you're on your own. Now, this one is a little different, and it says, no, the more you go up the income scale, yes, the more likely you are to be happy, and it's statistically significant. I'm not surprised by either one of these studies, but the bottom line is you need to hit some level of financial security in order to be happy. That's what they're saying. And the $75,000 a year, researchers said that that's kind of the level where you're going to be okay no matter where you live in the country. Even if you live in a very high-income district or county or town or whatever, that's a cutoff where you're going to be all right. You could pay the bills, and you also have enough for some leisure stuff. So that 75 line is like the you're going to be just fine line. Whereas there's an argument for anything underneath that, depending on where you live and everything, that you're really it's a struggle to make ends meet. And having that peace of mind, knowing that, well, I could take care of the bills, that's enough to make people happy. And in this new one, they say, yes, the more you make, generally speaking, the more your happiness ticks up. Guys, I can't adequately describe to you and explain to you how much this verifies the left-wing narrative. Because yes, the left is very focused on material well-being. That's traditional leftist approach, is like you have to look at economics to really study human beings and be objective about human beings and create a just society. Yes, you have to. Economic well-being is like front and center in this conception of the world. And what this shows me is, honestly, exactly the conclusion I had with the Princeton study, which is look at the social democracies and just understand that in study after study, they rank as the happiest in the world. Every now and then there's, maybe a little bit of a switch around in terms of which Scandinavian country it is, and every now and then another country, pops up in the top 5 or top 3. But by and large, they dominate the top 5 or 10 of the happiest in the world. It's the Scandinavian social democracies. Why is that? Because they've crafted systems to make sure that everybody's going to be financially stable. They've made sure, hey, we'll take certain things off the table. In some of those countries, education is totally off the table. Don't worry about it. It's taken care of. Healthcare is totally off the table. Don't worry about it. It's taken care of. You get way more vacation time. That's also off the table. You're going to have plenty of leisure time throughout the year. Nobody's going to take that away from you. Nobody's going to change that. They have generous social safety net with benefits. So I think that these studies prove that if we're trying to create a society that has a lot of people who are happy, that's the direction we have to go in. We have to move towards a social democratic system that views the floor for a person as a reasonable floor, where you're not living in some sort of desperate, poverty-stricken situation through no fault of your own. So, I like to file this stuff under the duh category, but there are, giant disagreements on this. Oftentimes you hear like rich Hollywood type people who would say like, no, there is no correlation at all between, money and happiness. That's kind of a bullshit position that's pretty convenient because usually the people who say that are pretty damn rich. So that's a BS position. But I also think it's a BS position to think it's solely the money that equals happiness, because there are plenty of like totally vapid, just terrible, greedy pieces of crap who are phenomenally wealthy, but they are miserable and they have depression or they end up committing suicide, who work on Wall Street, for example. That's just one example. But like, meaning is just as important as the financial stability. But that's the mix that you need. You need to have the financial stability to know you're going to be okay. And that allows you to be happy, where you could do the self-actualization, as a psychologist has put it previously. I'm forgetting who. But so you need the financial stability and then the meaning, something to define your life and give you meaning and give you passion and purpose. I think you need both of those things. It's not that only the money matters, and it's not that money doesn't matter at all. It definitely matters, as these studies show. But it's that line of you need to have some sort of financial security and stability, and then you search out the meaning, which, I think will bring you into an echelon of happiness that perhaps previously you couldn't breach if you don't have the meaning on top of the financial security and stability. So anyway, interesting study, not surprised, and I think, if anything, it proves what we've been saying all along, which is, hey, look at the happiest countries on earth and see what they're doing right. Study them. And it just so happens that all those countries have relative financial stability and security for everybody in the country. They treat their citizens like people, human beings. They get more vacation time. They get free healthcare, free education, generous social safety net programs. That's what it takes. That's what it takes. Financial stability plus meaning. That's what I think the recipe is. And I think that this study, as well as the one from 2010, are both fascinating but kind of unsurprising as well.